There's something out there waiting for us. And it ain't no man.
Don't you even know how to be a real Indian?
Well, sometimes they have to kill us. They have to kill us. Because they can't break our spirit.
Hey everybody, it's Ian. Back again for another episode of Native Film Talk. And today I sat down with Allie Young. Allie is many things. She is an actor, an activist, she's a writer. She worked in Hollywood briefly. I say briefly because she kind of left the industry on her own accord because of really representation issues, and she was, before the pandemic, living in LA, and now we're moved back to the reservation where she found her most recent line of work, which is activism. While she's always been an activist and had stances that have made news and have made a great impact, her work with Protect the Sacred, being the founder and director, has really shown her leadership and demonstrated the contributions to the Navajo Nation that can be made at the grassroots level that can impact an entire nation. And it was amazing. You know, she coordinated efforts with Protect the Sacred to have lockdowns, really to keep people entertained, because for those of you that don't know, the Navajo Nation was locking down on the weekends. You know, Friday afternoon to Monday morning, we would shut down completely at the height of COVID, because at one time, the Navajo Nation was the hotspot in the world, had the worst infection rates, had the highest fatality rates, and because of all of our comorbidities that we have, our inability to have, you know, we have high population densities per home, so social distancing was not as easy. Having access to running water was difficult. We have food deserts on the res. We have the reservation the size of West Virginia, but we have really a handful of grocery stores to support the entire reservation, and access to healthcare is very poor. When I say poor, I mean the distance to healthcare is very poor. It's long distances, so you think of emergency medicine, the time to respond to somebody who lives out in, in the middle of the res, the boonies, and they're having respiratory issues. It's difficult. So Allie worked with Protect the Sacred to have these weekend events when, she has contacts with people like Mark Ruffalo and Mark Hamill, Paul Rudd, and just leveraged her contacts from her used to life and coordinated events with the Navajo Nation president and former Miss Navajo, Radmilla Cody, and really their whole mission was to get people to sit at home and enjoy themselves, have something to do. So they coordinated Facebook Live events, and they were wildly popular. So we talk a little bit about that, but also she was a part of Walk Off in the movie Ridiculous 6, the Adam Sandler kind of spoof Western. There's a lot of it's fucking terrible Native representation in there. It's awful. And for those of you that don't know, there was a big walk-off. This film was filmed near Santa Fe, and there was a big walk-off because there was just the culture advisor and a good number of the Native people that were working on the film just were fed up. They were like, we're trying to offer feedback, we're trying to start a dialogue about what a more appropriate representation looks like, and Adam Sandler and company, they just didn't want to hear it. So they staged a walk-off, and Allie was one of those people that left. And we talk a little bit about that, but also I get her opinion about the industry itself of like, what is it going to take for us to keep going? I know I talk about it, and I kind of rack my brain about what is it going to take for us to get to the next level? What is it going to take for us to continue down the path that we're going, the path of progress? And and I'm just a casual viewer. I'm just a guy with a podcast, and I just consume it. I don't produce it. I don't write. I don't act. So I don't really know what it looks like on the industry side. So I ask her, does it look like we're in a good place? From where I'm sitting, it does. You tell me. Is it going to get better? Is it going to get worse? What do you think? Based on your position, your experience, your relationship with the industry, where do you think we go? So we kind of delve into all that, and I think we had a pretty great conversation. And, we also both went to the same college for the undergrad, so we kind of have some connections there. We kind of go a little too deep sometimes talking about college. So I apologize for those of you if that's a little too insider, but overall, it was a great interview. I had a great time talking to her, and yeah. So on the movie front, I'm working on One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. I realize it's a very old film. I've been kind of doing more recent ones and talking about more recent stuff and more current recent events, but I just think it's important to talk about that role, Will Sampson's role as chief, and I think it's just a fantastic piece that really started it all. You know, we look at some of the, maybe not started it all, but really got people in the mainstream to see, like, holy shit, these Indians can really act. These Indians are more than just, you know, the stoic Indian. They're more than the savage Indian that we see in the westerns and John Ford westerns and the John Wayne westerns. Maybe we should start to talk about more like their experiences, their stories. And so I think it's a powerful piece of work. But first, let's go listen to my interview with Allie. Y'all have a good one. All right. Yeah. Well, thanks for coming on, Allie. We actually know each other a little bit in person prior to COVID. We went to Dartmouth together. You are a 13?
I am.
You're 13. So I'm a 10. And so that means that I was a senior and you were a freshman. And I went back a few times after I graduated, and I saw you there a few times. So, and I think we've just been like friends on Facebook and just seen, you know, what you've been doing and what I've been doing from afar. But you recently became, I mean, for multiple things, you were in the news way back when for kind of Ridiculous Six and that whole Santa Fe fiasco when they were filming that Adam Sandler movie. And that's when I first was like, whoa, Allie's an actor? I didn't know that. You were a film major at Dartmouth, and I didn't really realize that until I started doing some research on you. And then most recently, or I guess now, you are the founder and director of Protect the Sacred, which is kind of an arm of I Will Harness. And I would like for you to talk about that. You're also co-founder of Well Read Native, and soon to be another piece of that will be Well Read Youth. And so I'm real excited to talk about that as well. But really today I wanted to have you on because I just think you have such a experience with the industry, you know, the Hollywood industry and mainstream media, and kind of like taking matters into your own hands and just saying like, you know, why let them control the narrative? Like we need to take things into our own hands, control a story, control our destiny, control our narrative. And well, I want to kick it off by starting with, you know, Protect the Sacred, because I think, you know, COVID-19, I've talked about it a few times on this podcast, hit our nation so hard, much harder. At one point, it was the hotspot in the entire world, and it was the talking point for a lot of mainstream media. And as Native people, we know usually when we're in the mainstream media, it's never for anything positive, and it's usually for things like this, when it's catastrophe, tragedy, for people to put their hand over their heart and say, "Oh, look at those poor people." But then you took it upon yourself to say, okay, despite all of the challenges with a third of our nation not having access to running water, with people not having the ability to social distance as well as we could because we have high populations within our homes, and really living in a food desert and having poor access to healthcare, living far distances from that. I want you to talk about all of those and how you came across that. But first, and I'm terrible about this, introduce yourself and then we'll jump right in.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for having me. I will introduce myself since we're both Danette in our language. Allie Young and Shet, Totsoni Nishle, Tohana Bashichi, Nakaidina Dashiche, Nut Odina Tachini Dashinale. So I am Big Water, born for the near the water people. My maternal grandfather is the Mexican people clan, and my paternal grandfather is the Tobacco people clan.
Awesome.
And yeah, well, actually, before I jump in, I grew up in Kirtland, New Mexico. I was born in Shiprock. Okay. And then shortly after that, went to boarding school in Massachusetts. And then
where did you go?
In the Cushing Academy.
Okay.
And then then off to Dartmouth and then LA, and now I'm back. But I came back a lot in between. Like sometimes it was like I was home for a year and then I went back and then home for a year. Yeah, before I jump into everything, I wanted to say that I do have a memory of you when
Uh-oh.
No.
If it's in college, it's always an uh-oh for me. Go ahead.
No, this was a good memory. You actually came to our common room because at Goldstein, because you did a project with one of my good friends who was my floor mate, James Smith. I don't know if you remember that.
I don't remember. What was okay, that was I think for my environmental capstone class. I think I remember that now.
Yeah.
Good deal.
Yeah, James is the golfer white dude.
Yes. Okay, I remember that.
Yeah.
Now. That's funny.
Yeah, so that's I was like, that's how I remember Ian. So
that's funny. Yeah, I fun fact, I'm a golfer. I tried out for the Dartmouth golf team a few times. Didn't make the cut, but made some good friends along the way. So that's probably how I ended up,
Yeah, well James, yeah, he didn't play golf either at Dartmouth, but he just loved playing golf.
That's
so I'm
awesome.
sure you guys bonded over that.
Yeah.
But yeah, so yeah, Protect the Sacred. I started last fall. I'm not fall. Spring, I guess, March 2020. At the very end of March. So that's when COVID was hitting all of us, or starting to hit all of us. I had come home from Los Angeles, where I was living for about 4.5 years. Worked in the industry for Nickelodeon, and then started my nonprofit career in the middle of that. Worked for Native Americans in philanthropy, and then found my way to Harness, which is where I've been since, an organization founded by America Ferrera, Wilmer Valderrama, and Ryan Pierce Williams, who is America's husband. So really working at the intersection of pop culture and social justice, and working with really incredible people in the industry who are trying to figure out how to use their very large platforms for social good. And then so I came home because I was living by myself in Los Angeles, and I actually had just come back from Hawaii. Like I came back right when LA said we're shutting down.
Oh,
and
wow.
So that very, I remember being at the airport in Hawaii because I went for my friend's wedding, who's also a Dartmouth alum.
Oh, nice.
I don't know if you know Nicole Kanayurek, but
she
was getting married.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
And so I was a bridesmaid, and I remember being at the airport and then looking at my phone. I was with my friend and she was like, oh my God, LA is shutting down. And so good thing we were on the flight home. So I got home and I remember I didn't have anything, and everyone had already done all of their shopping. The toilet paper
was all gone.
All gone.
All the Lysol wipes were gone.
Everything.
Gosh.
And I was like, crap. And so we weren't going to work. We were working remotely from home. And I remember just those couple of weeks being so lonely and so sad. And I'm like, if we're going to be who knows how long this is going to last. If we're working from home, I want to go home. And so I talked to my boss and she's like, yeah, I don't know how long we're going to be working remotely. So I'm okay with it. So I came home, took enough clothes for maybe a month because I didn't know. Came back, and then it turned into a lot longer than that. And I actually ended up just letting go of my apartment in May. So I drove back out there with my cousin, loaded up all of my stuff, brought it back over here, put it in storage, and I've been here since. And then and with Protect the Sacred starting, it really has kept me here because the work has very much been focused on Navajo Nation and how hard we are being hit. And at the very beginning, realizing that we needed to connect to our Native youth, and in the ways that they understood, but also to be the messengers in our communities, to be the ones to take what the CDC is saying and help their households understand what was happening. And that required like creativity. And I think, because our youth
Absolutely.
think that way. And, we're very creative people, we're storytellers. And so what we ended up doing was just doing some Facebook Live conversations. And I'm fortunate to have a relationship.
Those were fantastic.
Thank you. With my friendship with Mark Ruffalo that helped tremendously. And he was with us right at the beginning in the initial conversations.
He's just like an honorary uncle for Indian country. I love
him. He is. He's incredible. He's more than just an ally. He is like an organizer. And that's how he was with us. He was on calls with President Nez and the people at CORE and different people at Navajo Nation. So so we go ahead.
I was going to say on top of that, for people that weren't aware, people that aren't Navajo or weren't plugged in at the time of what was going on, Allie also collaborated with Mark to bring on Paul Rudd and Mark Hamill for a few other Facebook Live events. And, Radmilla Cody was also, that's like a celebrity in our house. We're just like, hey, Radmilla Cody, oh my God. And so we were just so blown away by the willingness of them to help, and to them, they're like, well, I'm home. What else am I going to do? But when you heard them talk, you were like, no, they're really involved. They're really engaged. They really care. And I think even from them, they kind of had this perception of like, why don't we do this more often? You kind of got that tone from them of just like, this is so easy to help. And I think that was so nice for really everyone to see. Like, it was so genuine. It didn't feel like, oh yeah, we're just going to come in for 5-10 minutes. Like, these Facebook Lives went on for a couple hours and just kind of shot the shit, but also really just talked about the importance of all the CDC requirements, all the things that we were recommending: social distancing, mask wearing, washing your hands, and really commending the youth to saying, because for those of you that don't know, a huge reason why this was important was the Navajo Nation had weekend lockdowns, and they were locked down, like you weren't allowed to leave your home. And so this was a way to entertain, but also because that's what else are the kids going to be doing? They're going to be on their phones. And I think it was exciting because it was also a bridge, because like Facebook's for old people, from what I understand, but it was also a way for like older generation to say like, hey, look at these people from the Avengers. Look, it's Mark Hamill from Star Wars. You can, check it out, go watch as a family. So I thought it was exciting. And that was
thank you. Yeah. Well, I have great memories from that time. Just such great conversations. And with Radmilla Cody, I actually grew up looking up to her, and
former Miss Navajo. Yep.
Yeah, and I knew all of like the songs I would sing, and I'm not fluent in Navajo, but like when I would sing her songs, she taught me Navajo too, and I would sing along with her. Sometimes I didn't really know what I was saying, but then I learned about it. And then having her come on was such a treat. And then now building a relationship with her, and she calls me, her Deja, and because we're related clan wise. But I told her that I was like, I loved you when I was a little girl. Whenever you were like near or around Farmington, I would be like, take me, I want to go meet her.
So this is really nuanced. So if you're not Navajo, I apologize, but Radmilla Cody, like me and my wife, we get like goosebumps whenever she talks. She has such a presence, even when she just talks on YouTube, and she the way she speaks Navajo just was so much strength and confidence, and we just get like goosebumps every time. But that was a fanboy fangirl moment. So sorry about that, but I think what was tremendous about Protect the Sacred, or what I wanted to talk about, was that was our opportunity to flip the script a little bit, because we eventually got recognition from Jimmy Fallon on his show. He talked about, hey, look at these awesome efforts of Protect the Sacred during COVID. But that was like the only that I saw like positive representation of Native people. Like everything else was, look at these poor Natives, look at how ravaged their nation is, and it was never positive. And President Nez would go on CNN occasionally, and he would talk about the efforts, but really it was like long form conversation, and it's like, unless you're interested in that particular thing, you're not really going to watch. And that was just kind of like news reporting. But I wanted like here's where they are now, and obviously we finally got positive recognition toward the end when we were pushing vaccination so hard, and we were kind of leading the nation in that regard. But when it comes to mainstream media and film and television, our representation is so negative. And can you talk a little bit about, what did that play into it at all, or did that affect kind of your thought process of why you wanted to start Protect the Sacred?
Yeah, absolutely. I've always, I'm always trying to figure out how to not only increase the representation of Native peoples in pop culture, mainstream media, but also correct the misrepresentation.
Mm-hmm.
And I think definitely during COVID, we struggled with that, and not us, but like you said, the mainstream media. We were doing this work, and they wanted to interview me and do all of these things, come out and film, and then you can only control like the interview and the questions that they're asking you. But then when they produce the actual thing and you see it air, you can't control how they're introducing the content or what they're saying. And so those were pieces where I often was, I'm like, really, they're definitely leaning into the poverty porn angle.
For sure.
And so then I was like, so how do I fix this, or how do I correct this in the future? And so where I was able to do that was really like print interviews, like, so journalists who were writing an article, because I would have a conversation with them on the phone. And what I appreciate about those interviews is they always leave off with, is there something that you want to talk about that I didn't ask? And I would always say, well, this is what happened when they were doing stories on me, or just in general, like COVID in Indian country. And I think there's more to the story that journalists are leaving out, and they're not talking about the resiliency of Native peoples, and that is what has gotten us through this pandemic, and falling back and relying on what we've always had to, which is our culture and our teachings, and what's been instilled in us as Native peoples, that community is important, and relationships and kinship.
Yep.
And
not the romanticized version of it, but like what it really means to our community.
Yeah. And I do think that, looking back on it, that is why we came out of this pandemic. It definitely hit us hard. We definitely lost a lot more people than we should have. And but I think what pulled us through, and then the success with the vaccine rollout, is thinking about community first, thinking about our relatives first, and thinking about our elders and their contribution to who we are as Indigenous peoples, and the ancestral knowledge, the culture, the medicine ways that they're the keepers of, and that they're still teaching a lot of us. And I think that's what we were pushing for as Protect the Sacred, and we really wanted our youth to understand that. And I think it clicked because we're in a time right now where Native youth, I think there's sort of this like renaissance, but Native youth want to be connected and learn about our history more than ever before. In my generation growing up, I know that even myself, there was a certain time period, I think probably early, like middle school into like, 6th, 7th, 8th grade, where sometimes I felt ashamed.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, absolutely.
I
Absolutely. I was in the same boat. I've talked about that multiple times on the podcast of just like, that's why I partly wanted to do this, because I'm in a time in my life where I'm like, I'm proud to be Native. Like I look at myself and I'm just like, I'm proud of who I am. But why did I think that? well, how did I come across? And then why did you also think that? It's like, what in representation in media, in literature, in education do Native people have that you and I had not met each other until we got to Dartmouth? But we had that same kind of awakening of just like, I hate myself. I hate myself. I want to get as far away from the reservation as possible. I want to get as far away from removed as myself. I want to be less brown. I want to be more like the other. I want to be white. And then you get to a certain point where you're like, no, actually, you shed a lot of layers of pain and a lot of layers of trauma to get to that level where you're like, you can look at yourself in the mirror and like, thank you, I'm happy that I'm here. But it's representation, it's like what we're exposed to is it's what we're told who we are, and that crap molds a lot of who we are. And I think that it's important for us to go through things like COVID because and message it the way that you did, because contrary to what the mainstream media would say, they were like, well, the only people that were affected were predominantly people who were in nursing homes and the elderly. And for regular America, they were just like, well, it was their time. They were going to leave anyway. It was like kind of the tail end. So I think people were less affected by it, at least the mainstream culture, non-natives. But for us, like, that's the most important people. Those are the knowledge holders. When you have a primarily oral tradition, those are your language holders. Those are your knowledge keepers. Those are your storytellers. And I think for us, it was the exact opposite of like, that's the worst people that should be leaving this, because they're leaving with so much wisdom. And I think our youth saw that, and I think that's important. But I also think that's the part of it that the mainstream media doesn't care to talk about. And I'm frankly glad they don't, because it'll get romanticized. But it's an important aspect of like why we need to start telling our own story and controlling the narrative.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I was saying, like the Native youth, I'm so proud of Native youth nowadays, because they are growing up being so proud of who they are. That's and who we are as a community, as Indigenous peoples. And I really do see them putting in so much effort to restore and preserve that knowledge and the languages. It's really beautiful to see.
It's exciting for them to be exposed to coverage like Dakota Access Pipeline, and to see activism, see what real activism looks like, and see the real bullshit that happens, like with Canada now pushing out their report of like the number of unmarked graves outside of residential schools, and Deb Haaland now releasing that they're going to launch an investigation in the United States to do the same. Like, that's going to be the reality for them to know about. Like, for us, we had to go to college and get non-public school education to learn about the history and start to try to uncover that. But for them, hopefully it's a little bit easier. They don't have that same kind of life cycle of identity that we had, where we have to hate ourselves before we can love ourselves. And it's really exciting. And so to add to that, you have well-read Native and well-read youth. And so, which is launching soon, but has a specific Native lens of talking about, it's really like an Oprah's book club, but like for Native content. And so that's an aspect of representation that I've never seen. I've never seen a book club like that. Can you talk a little bit about why you did that?
Yeah, so Well Read Native is co-founded with my two friends from Dartmouth, actually. Abigail Jackson Smith, and who's Oglala, and Kayla Gebek Carroll, who is Ojibwe. So she is Abby, it was really Abby's idea, which she talked to me about. Abby used to live in LA, and we used to hang out there. And I remember we were hanging out one time, and she talked about this idea, and she's like, I want to do something with you. Like, let's create something. And we talked about it for years. And then we thought for maybe like a couple, 2-3 years. And then we thought about it being a podcast. We were like, let's do like a podcast. And then all of a sudden it was like book club. And she was like, yes, Well Read Native. And we actually created the handle Well Read Native maybe 2 years ago, and never posted anything on it.
Wow.
Like we were like, we're gonna do this. We don't know when, but she wanted to get the handle. So that was created, and then we were like, well, and we talked about Well Read Black Girl, which if you don't know what that is, that's also a nonprofit organization about uplifting Black authors and writers. And stories.
I only know about that because of you, because I follow you guys and you share their content. So that,
Yeah.
but that's okay. Yeah, the inspiration definitely parallels. I understand.
Yeah. So, and that's how that came about. And then we were talking with Kayla and looped her in, and she was on board. And we're just all are huge fans of Native authors and our stories that are out there. So we're like, let's create a community where we can share, that content, and create a space where we can invite these authors in and have conversations with our members who aren't just Native. We have membership that's across the world. It's pretty global.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so we have in each book club meeting that we've had, the attendance ranges from like 40 to 40 to 60 people.
That's
And
great.
yeah, it's incredible because it's not short. Our book club meetings can go for a couple of hours, maybe over a couple of hours, but it's
And
really
you
cool to
do it
see.
monthly, right? And you have
We do it
you have a schedule
monthly.
post on your Instagram and
Yeah.
LinkedIn, right?
Mm-hmm. And then we yeah, so we're kind of also starting to talk about what it looks like post-COVID. So this Well-Read Native launched during COVID. So obviously we're doing virtual book club meetings. So we're really excited to start thinking about what it looks like post-COVID, and when like people are already gathering now, but when we can do that more and more. And
That's great.
if we're going to have like in-person book club meetings or discussions. And then out of that, Well-Read Native Youth is launching, and that's going to be really focused on children's books, young adult books. And I really love what's happening nowadays. A lot of these publishing companies are they're adapting their novels or memoirs into young adult versions. So I don't know if you've seen, like, Michelle Obama has a YA version of her book.
Oh, really? I didn't know that. The I Am
Mhm.
Becoming, she has a
Yeah.
version. Wow,
Mhm.
that's awesome.
And then we talked with one of our authors. Oh my gosh, I'm forgetting which author it was, but he talked to us about it's Anton Troyer. We just had him on our last his book is language what was it, the Language Warrior Manifesto, something like that.
Okay, I trust you.
And anyway, so one of his books, he was telling us, is going through that same process.
That's great.
So it's really cool to see these, like, making these books for YA.
So what's interesting too is, like, this show has a global reach too, which freaking blows my mind all the time. We're like, hey, writing in from the UK, I listen to your podcast pretty regularly. I'm just like, ugh, I'm like, hey, thank you, but that's kind of weird. Like, and then not to say that, like, it's weird to have people across the globe, but it's just like strange to me that you can do something like this, and people, non-native and native, are hungry for this kind of stuff. They're like hungry for real conversations around actual representation. Like, what are Indigenous creators really, what are they really doing? And what do real people that are affected by that representation like think of this, both accurate and not accurate? And I think it's so important for Well-Read Native and podcasts and really media and YouTube channels to talk about what real representation looks like, and accurate representation, and more importantly, what misrepresentation looks like, so these people can call foul when they see it. And I think that that's so important, that out of the podcast and yours, you saw a void and you filled it. And I think that's something I try to tell people on this all the time. It's just like, if you see a void, an opportunity to fill it, just do it.
Yeah.
Do you get asked all the time, do I have to be native to join?
Yeah, we do.
I get asked that all the time. Do I have to be native to listen? I'm like, yeah, absolutely not.
Yeah, and we're like, no, we encourage non-native people to
Absolutely.
join, because it is education. It's like free education to y'all. So
Yep.
but yeah, and I can see, especially for the ones are usual suspects, the ones that we know are joining all the time. They are I can see them like learning, and then they're always asking questions in the Q&A section,
Mm-hmm.
and it's so cool to see them really engaging with not only the book but just overall, Native history, representation, experience. But yeah, and I think that yeah, I think our goal really is to just talk about the diversity even of Native peoples. So we're always trying to think of authors who are Afro-Indigenous, who are Indigenous from New Zealand. So it's not just Native American authors, it's Indigenous authors. So we had an Indigenous author from New Zealand a few months ago.
That's
I'm
great.
just like forgetting everyone's
It's
name.
okay. It's okay. I think that's incredibly important. On my journey, initially I started with just like, I just want to do Native American stuff because that's what I know. But really, when you look at Indigenous content, like there's so many parallels because we have a similar relationship with how we became, why we're still here, how we got to where we are, and our relationship with wherever dominant culture presides around us, or that we occupy, or that we are a part of. So like I'm gonna do like Once We're Warriors, the great film from New Zealand, or actually from the Maori. And I think that just talking about stuff like that, seeing where we're more alike than we are different, really is powerful for us because it grows our numbers. Because when you say Native, it gets lumped in as something else, in CNN, because we're so small of a community. But when Indigenous, at first, I think people had problems with it because it was too broad. But I'm like, well, broad means there's more of us. The broad means there's more support. Why do you think that in 2021 it has to take two Indigenous people, two Native people to do something like this? Like why are we still being misrepresented and kind of being an invisible statistic? It's a very broad question.
That's
It's
a
very,
good
very,
question
very
because I'm
complicated.
still asking that question,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't know if I have an answer, but I think it's because we're still being left out of the conversation, and because people don't know about like our history, even sometimes that we still exist.
Right.
I've had experiences living in LA where I would get into conversations with Uber drivers, and we're like, where are you from? Where are you from? And we get to talking, and I say that I'm Native American, and they're like, what? You're Native American? And I said, yeah. And they're like, wow, I've never met a Native American before. I've only seen Native Americans in the Westerns. Like I've been told one time I was on the elevator and I was working at Native Americans in Philanthropy, and I was holding a sign that we had to put up, and I was covering the bottom part, but the top part said Native Americans.
Yep.
And he saw that, and I was in the elevator, and he was like, "Are you Native American?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'm Native American." He goes, "Wow." He's like, "I've never met a Native American before." And he was like, "Congratulations." He said, "Congratulations."
Congratulations. Oh God.
And I didn't know what to
The hell was
say.
that about? Yeah. What do you say to that?
I was like,
Thank you.
"Thanks." And then afterwards, I was like, "Dang it, I should have said like for still being alive."
Yeah.
you know?
It's well, yeah, I've had so many of those moments where, where I've gotten like oh, you're one of the good ones, or like so many of you are alcoholics on your reservation. I'm so glad you're not part of that, and this and that. And at the time, obviously, you still remember those. And now, I wish I had a time machine so I could go back and be like, I got this whole list of things I want to say to you now. But at the time, you're just, oh, thank you, I guess.
Yeah.
Especially going to prep school in Cushing. I'm sure you got a lot of that, like, oh, you're Native, or I've never met a Native. And those are the those are the people too that are going to be like at the helm of a lot of these corporations and organizations that are going to run this company. And so I went to Phillips Academy for summer school throughout high school. Even though I graduated from the res, like I would go to summer school back east at PA. And same thing, like just the ignorance of, because you have global presence there too. It's not just like from the United States. And I think that that was like some of the most interesting things is like the fascination with natives because of who they've seen on TV, and like they don't
The
see
Western.
the Western. They like everything they've seen of natives is like a snapshot in time. It's never current, and when it is current, it's like Wind River of like, look at these poor natives, and it's a gross misrepresentation of who we are. The poverty porn, I think, is where we are in mainstream culture. It's just like they want to get that right, that they don't want to care. They don't care to talk about the resiliency. And I think what's important with Well-Read Native, with this podcast, is try to highlight some of the work that is out there that is positive. Because now we have positive representation. We have Rutherford Falls. We have reservation dogs coming out, but that's like the first time since like Smoke Signals we can really like, finally, accuracy. What do you think of do you think we're on the upswing? Like, you think we're in a better place than where we were?
I do. I think we are. I think we just got to keep pushing, because I think definitely the Sierra and Sterling, Sierra Ornelas and Sterling Harjo are paving the way, and I think I only see it going up from here, and it's doing well. Rutherford Falls I think has done well. I'm sure Reservation Dogs is going to do well, and it's sad, but it's almost like we have to prove ourselves in the industry, especially, and I say that from experience because I've pitched my own idea to like Netflix and Amazon, and pitching there, the feedback I'd gotten, and it just seems like they see our stories as like too niche and too like there isn't an audience for it, because like the Native population is so small, and that to them that's our target audience, but it's not really. And we want to reach everyone, and we want to share our stories with the entire world. So I think I'm excited for what's going to come down the pike, and I think that as long as we keep pushing and just creating, like you said, if there's if there's a gap that we see or a void, then we're like, just fill it. And I think that's what we need to keep doing, and that's how we've gotten to this point, because we're seeing that they're not going to voluntarily invite us to the table,
right?
So we need to approach the table, or we need to create our own space, and we can do that nowadays because of social media and all of access to all of this like digital content that we're in control of, that we can create.
I think that's the most encouraging. So I talk about that all the time of like, you need to make it worth it for them to say, what do they have going on over there? Like there's money being lost over there. There's pennies rolling out the door that we want to take. Look at what they're doing, whether that's in social media or YouTube. There's opportunities for that. Like I always talk about Boney War Pony. Of like, that's probably the most accurate Boney War Pony productions on YouTube. Of like, that's probably the most accurate like Navajo representation I've seen since like Coyote stories, like the old Coyote stories. And what's awesome is like, that's just created for us, and he has no other reason to make it other than for Navajo people. And it resonates with other Native communities, but he did it for us. And 1491 is the same thing. They're like, we're not making this for anybody else except for Native people. And frankly, they were just like, I just want to have fun. I just want to make the stuff I want to make. And now Sterling, catapulted that. You have like Migsy and Bobby Wilson, like all of those guys in Dallas, like they've all used that to eventually, it took some years. It took almost 10 years for them to finally, get to where they are now. But I think that that's your proof of concept is like, even with our shows, or I say your show, but like Well-Read Native, my show, it's like so many non-Native people flock to this because they're just like, nobody else does this. And
Mm-hmm.
I gladly welcome, I call it competition, but I gladly welcome somebody else to come and do this too, because I don't speak for everyone. I don't have a voice that's for everyone, but we need more people talking about what you're doing and what I'm doing, and it's profound work. And you're absolutely right. I think with Deb Haaland too, getting, Secretary of the Interior, I think it's so positive. Like for the first time in a long time, I feel optimistic about where we are in Indian country and being Indigenous. And while it's unfortunate seeing the unmarked graves being uncovered in Canada, but it finally adds like a statistic to like the stories, and
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
I think it's only going to do good. Can you talk a little bit about, you've worked in the industry, like why don't they care to get it right? Whether it's casting, always casting the same people, or casting people who claim to be native and not really native. Like, why is it so lazy? Why does it feel so lazy, I should say?
Well, I think it's because it's a system, and I think it's filmmaking and television is so formulaic that there's this formula that they just repeat over and over, and I think that it's just been easy that way, and also because the industry is all about time is money, and
Mm-hmm.
I definitely learned that working like on sets and stuff, but yeah, so I think that's why for a long time, I mean, for people who know like the history of cinema, that cinema was essentially propaganda, and
Mm-hmm.
um, they had the production codes and everything that were very racist, and they definitely had an agenda of the stories that they wanted to tell and the way they wanted to perceive or convey, especially communities of color. And if you look back, I thought it's like, wow. I just recently shared a short presentation about that to my colleagues at Harness, and a lot of them hadn't seen that, and they were like shocked. And I said, that's the industry that we're working with, the entertainment industry,
Mm-hmm.
and that's the foundation of this industry, and that's why it's 2021. And in recent years with Oscars So White and like the pushback, like with the HFPA and everything like that, I think that the reason that that's just now happening in 2021 is because when something is built on a foundation like that, it's really hard to change that system. And I think that, I mean, that's why I think it's just it's been a bit intentional. And I think but yeah, I think now with the protests that happened last summer with COVID, and everyone watching the news and seeing what's happening in Navajo Nation and learning that a third of our people don't have running water, like very eye-opening statistics that people weren't even aware of, with the residential schools and what's happening with the mass graves. And I think all of that is changing the narrative landscape, and we are going to be seeing more diverse stories because there's just a demand for it.
Absolutely. And, we have it's not like we don't have content out there. And I think it's important for your book club to be out there to demonstrate that. And because movies like Indian Horse have happened, while it is by a white showrunner, it was from Richard Wagamis, who wrote the book Indian Horse. And even though it is a fictional story, it's based on real events. And you watch that movie and you read that book and you're just like, God, like it adds a layer of the history. It adds the humanity to that history that's just like a few paragraphs, or maybe in some really niche, like somebody's like one piece of work that they did on the experiences of Native people through residential boarding schools. And it's just so powerful and so heartbreaking and so heart-wrenching. But I think it's important because now that movie's out there, people will find it now. Like I know that Indian Horse is a part of like a lot of required curriculum in Canada in high school now. So like kids in Canada are growing up learning about like their messed up history and their messed up relationship they have with Indigenous people, and that they still have to this day. And I think it's important for the United States to follow suit. And I'm really encouraged that Deb Haaland is launching that investigation, because they're going to find the same exact crap here. And it just breaks my heart to think of how many language learners, how many knowledge keepers and storytellers we never got to meet because of that stupid, just ideology of like, we gotta kill the Indian and save the man.
Yeah. People that are supposed to be alive today, like that could have been our, grandmas and grandpas.
And then even it even adds a layer of, because a lot of our relatives went through boarding school, but they don't talk about it, and for good reason. When you see what they've gone through or have an idea of what they've gone through, you're just like, God, And then so when you make that connection of like, you're just displaying the poverty porn, you want to get that accurate, but like, how does a community in America end up like that? And not just one Native community, but all Native community. I should say all. Majority of the Native communities look like that. Struggle with alcoholism, struggle with substance abuse, domestic violence, homophobia, transphobia, colorism. Why do all these communities that are in different parts of the United States have different, origin stories? Why do they all have that same issues? And it's like, well, let's talk about those.
Yeah.
And I think those are exciting to talk about, because those uncover the real kernels of truth that are going to help us, propel us forward.
Yeah. I'm always like, we got to look at the root, and we got to ask questions. And the root is white supremacy. It's colonialism and white supremacy. That is the foundation of this country.
I think what's unfortunate is a lot of those terms get overused, and I think they just become like terms that turn people off or get people fired up. And I think it's so difficult to have like long form conversations and have honest conversations with people about like what the truth is. In your line of work, like, have you done a lot of correcting, I guess, of like real representation, like what, like accurate representation of Natives? Like even today, do people still have like gross gross misconceptions of who Native people are and what we are?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, and like I said, with some of the coverage around COVID, making sure that that it isn't all about poor natives, and that it's not poverty porn, that there's more to our stories. So, I think especially today, when people want to help Native communities, they are kind of coming at it from like that kind of charity angle. And that's where we have to stop them and be like, no, we don't need your charity. We need allies. We're a small population in this country because of what has happened to us historically, because of genocide and forced assimilation. And so what we need in our movements are allies. So are you going to show up as allies and help us be powerful in numbers? And that's what we need.
That's awesome. What do you think we need to continue to do to improve representation and stop doing? I guess I'll say those two things.
Yeah. I think that we need to be definitely advocating for Native writers, creatives to be in these spaces. I think that there are so many of us, and I had the great opportunity. And I think that's also why the industry is lazy. I think they're not putting in effort to find Native talent because we're out there. And I had the amazing opportunity to actually meet Shonda Rhimes and have a conversation with her.
No kidding.
Yeah, it was through
Dartmouth alum, Shonda Rhimes.
Yeah, it was actually through a Dartmouth program / event. And I talked to her about what I was passionate about in the work of increasing Native representation, and that I actually related to her on so many levels in her mission to get into television to tell the stories of her people and create characters about her people. And I said, that's what I want to do for my people, because, you know, at the time when I met her, I think it was like 2014 or something. I was like, it's 2014 and I still don't see people who look like me on television, or characters that represent my community. And she was like, yeah. And so she was like, well, I want to say that I know so many talented Native actors, directors, writers. You're out there, so keep pushing for it. And so I think, you know, advocating for Native creatives, and then also just continuing to, even if you don't have like a platform, or if you don't have a deal with Netflix or Amazon, whatever, just keep creating your content and putting it out there for the world to see. And then the things that, you know, that I think you said what not to do.
Yeah, what not to do or stop doing.
Yeah. I think we need to stop. I think sometimes there are yes men out there, and which I unfortunately saw, especially with the Adam Sandler walk off. I think there were some Natives who stayed on the project because, which was understandable. You know, I tried to see all sides of that, and how it was difficult for some people to say, yeah, I'm going to walk off and walk away from, you know,
employment.
however much, employment.
Yeah.
Like that's how they put food on the table. But, you know, I think we need to stop saying yes to we need to push back on things. And I think that we can't say, just because a big time studio says, well, we need to do it this way, like, don't say yes. Don't like, have at least a conversation with them about it, and say, like, this is, and I think that's why Bruce Kincole, who was the cultural advisor on the Ridiculous Six, like, I just commend him. I don't know where he's at nowadays, but I commend him for standing up for his tribe and his people, and saying, this is not the accurate representation of my people, and I'm not going to be part of this. And he told us, I've been trying to have a conversation with Adam Sandler, at least some of like the head producers, and I'm giving them, you know, this is my deadline. If no one comes down to speak to me by this time, then I'm walking away.
Wow.
And we need more people like that.
That's awesome.
In the industry, to say, no more of this poverty porn, no more, like, and sometimes, you know, some of our stories have a little bit of, you know, that struggle, but that our stories are so nuanced. And so I think just finding that balance between, you know, the complicated relationships that we have is in our communities as Indigenous peoples, the fact that there is a reality that you know, my own brother is an alcoholic, and some of my uncles, and that we do struggle with those things, but making sure that there's a balance, that there's some levity to that, you know.
Yeah, no, what you said was absolutely powerful, in that I try to not condemn people as well when I talk about movies of like misrepresentation, especially with actors I respect. You know, Gary Farmer, Wes Studi, Michael Grey Eyes. These guys are all prominent actors, but you look in their filmography, you're like, there's a handful of roles that you really cringe at. And I've heard, you know, like Gary Farmer specifically talk about some of his roles, and he's just like, looking back on it, there's a lot of roles I'm not very proud of, and I'm kind of mad at myself for taking it. But he's like, but at the time I needed the money, and I needed to keep putting myself out there. And he's like, and I wouldn't have gotten the roles I later got in my career had I not done that. At least that's what he tells himself. You know, I think back then in the 80s and 90s, maybe it was a little more absolute. And I think that's why right now being an ally is what you just said is the most important thing. Of like, if you're calling yourself an ally, I guess, like non-native people, then I'm more likely to say, I'm going to step away from this role because it's problematic. Because then they know they have more of a soft landing, because they're like, I have somewhere else to work. instead of where it was this mindset of scarcity, which breeds that thought process of what you're talking about of like, I can't get anything else if I leave this, and I can't ruin this connection because there's not only so many connections I can get in this industry. It's a dangerous place to put Native people in,
Yeah.
because we become complicit, whether it's intentional or unintentional. And I really hate that about the industry. But I think we're getting that in a better place. That was great insight. Thank you. That was great insight.
Yeah. And you just reminded me of, I don't know what your thoughts are on Yellowstone, which I think is a great show, and my family watches it. And I know a lot of Native families watch Yellowstone, and for some reason we're so drawn to the cowboy, like, rodeo kind of culture and the
Mm-hmm.
Westerns. I actually grew up watching Westerns because
Yep, me too.
that's what
So,
my Nellies, like my grandfathers wanted to watch that when they would come over, or
mm-hmm.
that's what we were raised on, because I was raised in a very country household. I grew up on country music. My dad was a bull rider, my uncles, my brothers, all bull riders.
Wow.
Yeah, so
But that's pretty common, on the
it
res
is.
anyway.
It is. And I talk, one day maybe I'll write a film about it or something, but I always talk about why that is. And I think that my theory is that when we were going through, like, the assimilation process, well, one, I feel like we taught the cowboys their way of life.
Mm-hmm.
We taught them how to live off of the land and live, that way. And then when we went through the assimilation process and coming out of that and trying to reconnect to who we were, I think we resonated with that cowboy culture. I think that was the closest kind of, like, culture that was, like, very similar to our own. And so
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of my thought on that. But anyway, I don't remember where I was going with
It's
the
okay.
country.
I completely agree with you. Like, there's a ton of natives that are in, I guess just rodeo and in the different facets of rodeo, whether it's rodeo or whether it's, team roping, bronc riding, bull riding. I think there's probably even natives there now, representing at the highest level in those sports in professional ranks. And I think that's going to continue to get native youth drawn to that because they see themselves in, PBR, they see themselves
Yeah.
in team roping. And it's like, oh my gosh, like, not only can you make a living there, you can make a great living there, and it's attainable. And I think it's so exciting to see people achieve at that level. And what you were talking about with why native people are drawn toward westerns, unfortunately, I think that was the closest thing to, like, portrayal of, like, rural America, to back
Yeah.
in the day. It was all poverty
Yeah.
porn. It was all like Great Depression crap. But then here came the Western, here came John Wayne, and you finally saw Indians on TV. And you're like, close enough. I love it,
Yeah.
because same thing in my house. I hated Westerns because it's all they wanted to watch. Just
Yeah.
couldn't stand it. So that's why I talked about, like, The Quick and the Dead, because it was like a Western, but not a Western. I'm like, finally, something different. And I thought it was,
Yeah.
yeah, he's just, I was over it. I hated Westerns growing up. I just wanted to watch, like, Nickelodeon and, I just like, gosh.
I think I brought the Westerns up because I was talking about Yellowstone. That's what it
Yeah.
was.
That's right. Thank you.
But yeah, so Yellowstone, yeah, I don't know what your thoughts are on that. Like I said, I feel like my family watches it. But back to what you were saying about allyship, like, for me, I'm still a little bit, while it's a good show, I'm still a little bit torn because of the girl who is not native, who
Kelsey
plays the native
Aspel.
character.
Yep. So
Yeah.
I have some good thoughts on this, but go ahead.
No, and then she was the one that was in Wind River. And
Mm-hmm.
so, like that, if you're a good ally, you don't take that role. You let a native woman have that role.
Right.
So yeah.
You were on, so Taylor Sheridan, showrunner of Yellowstone, and also the creator of Hell or High Water. I'm sorry, director, writer, Hell or High Water, Wind River, and Sicario. he's got a lot of clout now in the industry because of those three movies, and Wind River really allowed him to like take a lot of those people that were in that and move them into Yellowstone, one of which unfortunately was Kelsey Aspel, who claims to be from the Eastern Band of Cherokee, and that's been like debunked multiple times. She used to be Kelsey Chow, changed her name. But even though there was a lot of controversy around Wind River when she was cast, she was still cast again in Yellowstone, which came out 4 or 5 years after Wind River came out. And it's unfortunate to see, because even though there's negative press about it, they're just still moving along, you know?
Yeah.
But the problem is they also hire other Native actors that are Native, and you're like, oh, you know, I hate it, but at the same time, you know, these people are getting work.
Yeah.
But at the end of it all, it's not a Native writer, it's not a Native showrunner. They're only going to get so much right, you know, and I think that's unfortunate. Same thing with Longmire. Longmire is a great show. It very much feels like an old Western, but with a modern twist, and they get a lot of stuff right. And it's based off of Craig Johnson's novels, and he lived near a res. He has Native friends, but it's still a white guy writing about Natives, and it's close, and it's close, but it's not enough. You know, in 2021, it's not enough. And I think we need to start that. Is like when people ask me, because they ask me all the time, like people like, what do you think about Yellowstone? And they're like waiting for me to like give it a stamp of approval so they can like gush about Yellowstone. And I'm like, if you like it, it's okay, but I'm not gonna like say it's a great show, you know?
Right. And Lou Diamond Phillips is not Native, right?
No, he's Filipino. Yeah, he's made a whole career around, you know, playing Richie Valens. You know, he's a Mexican hero, you know, to them, but he's Filipino. And same thing with us. He played Darkwind. He's played Native all throughout his career. But he's ethnically ambiguous, and that's another problem. Is like he has the look that he can be cast across different stuff. I've had a few Native actors on here and people that work in the industry that tell me that there's a look, quote unquote, that they have still, like the industry has, of like who Native people are. And if you don't have that look, they won't cast you as Native. Do you think that's ever going to stop anytime soon? Or like, what is it going to take to unravel that?
I think there have been important steps already. So, like Rutherford Falls. And I think that you see the diversity of Native people on that. You know, from Bobby Wilson to Jana Schmieding. I think that, you know, it's not one look of a Native person.
We all don't look like Michael Gray Eyes.
No. But then you had Julia Jones in there, and you had so you had the light skin, you had the ones with the long hair, you had, you know, just the, like I said, the diversity of Native people. So hopefully that kind of opens more doors. And I know that Sterling Harjo definitely probably made sure that he was also showing that the diversity of Native people as well.
Absolutely.
I think it's
his filming. So I followed a ton of people that worked on that show, and watching their Instagram stories, that seemed like the best party to be at every single day. Like that looked like so much fun. And exactly what you were saying, like the diversity, you could see it across, like, you know, even though it was like in the background and stuff, you could see the diversity in just Native presence that we've probably never seen on television. And hopefully we continue to see stuff like that, because we all look different. You can line up like 100 different Natives from across the country and across the world, and just Indigenous people. We all look different, but unfortunately we're fed this look. And so non-Native people are like shocked of like, oh, you don't look like Michael Gray Eyes. There's no way that you're Native, you know?
Yeah. What is it? The nose and the hair and the cheekbones, right?
Yep. And they always have to tell you like, oh yeah, you know, I guess that's where I get my high cheekbones from. You know, I'm probably have some Native in my lineage. You know, I did my 23andMe. You know, I'm X amount percentage. I think especially with the availability of that kind of stuff, like we really need to get ahead of all of that, because I think that unfortunately, like this is like conspiracy theory part of my brain of like there's going to be a war on like Native identity eventually, you know, and we kind of see some inklings of that where we're going to continue to have to fight for even just who we are. I mean, already it started with Blood Quantum. You're going to be measured out of existence eventually, but also you see instances across Canada and United States where people are trying to like take land and resources from Native people by claiming Native heritage.
Yeah.
And I think even telling those stories is important for people to gain more allies. At this point, you said it, like gaining more allies, allyship is the most important thing. I think that was incredibly powerful what you said.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, we
We
kind
need
of
more.
go ahead. Go ahead.
I was gonna say we need more Mark Ruffalo's.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, one last thing before we go, like, do you ever just like I'm saying this in the kindest way possible. You're just a res girl. How does it feel to like know Mark Ruffalo, Mark Hamill, and like to have like coordinated all these events? Do you ever take a step back and like, after being in the Dartmouth magazine, having been featured in the news, like your family's still on the res. Like, what does your family think? Like you're to them, you're just Allie, I'm sure. Like you're just this like little res girl, little Asian res girl still from there. And but you're doing so much like great work. Like, do you ever take a step back and like say, like, how is this my life?
Yeah. I mean, I think the past year has been like crazy and
Yeah.
just kind of picked up with Protect the Sacred. And yeah, I have recently started to take a step back. I think I was so much into the work
So
that
busy.
I didn't,
Just so
I was,
busy.
yeah, I was so busy and organizing all of this stuff and making sure that the events were happening. But now with the In Style piece that came out yesterday, and I wrote
Gosh.
that piece.
Yep.
And with that, I got so many messages and texts yesterday from people and just saying that it was great and thank you for your voice and all of that. And one of my friends who's non-native here in Farmington called me up and he was just like, I just want to say that you're a cool chick. And he was like, and he's like, and you hang out with us, regular people, and you'll share your stories. And I sometimes think, like, why is she hanging out with us? And I was like, oh, well, I appreciate that. And I was like, but, I guess I just don't, sometimes I forget, especially when I talk with my friends and I'm sharing some of my stories, I forget like that it's a unique experience.
Right.
And not everyone gets to FaceTime with Mark Ruffalo or, have a panel with Mark Hamill and Paul Rudd and all of that. But like, I guess I'm just trying to be authentic and I'm just trying, especially when I'm speaking.
It shows.
Thank you.
I've never once thought you've been disingenuous. I've never once thought you're not being authentic or you're being fake or any of that like language that people use when they say like, oh, people have made it, they changed. I don't feel that at all. And that's kind of why I ask you. It's like I still see a res girl when you're just talking and chilling and goofing around. And I think that's the representation that makes me go like, wow, we need more of that.
Yeah.
When people say like, oh yeah, I'm Navajo from the and they say where they're from and maybe they've been away from home for so long that they're just I don't want to give any specific references, but some people, you see them talk, you see them carry themselves, you're like, man, I don't see it in you anymore. Like, I believe you and I know your family, but it's just like, it's different. And I think it's awesome that you're on that stage and those people like Mark Hamill, Paul Rudd, Mark Ruffalo, they see what we really are, who we really are. And it's important to have allies like Mark. And it blows my mind that you know him and you're just like,
well, that's the thing is, I guess, I've gotten so used to seeing these people as like, almost like colleagues in a way, because that's like my work, because we work with people like them. We have to be professional about it. I can't show up on the call and be fangirling over, like people or celebrities. And so I'm always constantly reminding myself, like, they're just like you, they're your colleagues. They're learning. Actually, they're coming to this conversation because they want to learn from you. So we're the experts, right? And that's how I try to see it. And so I guess that's how I'm always training myself to think that way. And just to come to them, like I said, with my most authentic self, and because they're genuinely wanting to spend time learning about another community, and they want to genuinely help. So I almost feel like I have an obligation to help them on that journey to be good allies. I think it's a reciprocal relationship. And so, and then when I'm out of work and sometimes, like I said, recently been kind of taking a step back and being like, yeah, I have a pretty cool life. And
You do.
I'm grateful and I'm blessed, and I don't, I don't forget that.
Yeah, you definitely are, but it doesn't come without work. I always say, the harder you work, the luckier you are. Like, you didn't luck your way into any of this. Like, you worked your butt off, and you definitely were ready with every opportunity. When it presented itself, you gave it everything, even if it didn't work out. And I think that's something that's important that I try to like message at the end of all of these, of like when I talk to these Native creatives and actors, directors, and like you, it's just like they went after it, they were ready, they had a set of morals that they held on to, and it's sometimes it hindered them, but most times it came out on the other side and like better than where they were before. I think it's so exciting to see all the stuff that you do. Can you talk a little bit more, before we go? I keep saying this is the last thing, but like protect the sacred, because that's, it hits home for both of us, because it hits, it's a Navajo Nation. But what's next for Protect the Sacred? I just want to end on that.
Yeah, well, yeah, definitely some exciting stuff. Like I said, we have a new mission and vision, and it really is now inclusive of other tribes across the country.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, so it's Navajo Nation will always be like our foundation and how we started, and part of that story. But we do want to expand and work more with Native youth. So that is our new focus, is on Native youth leadership development. In addition to the public health work that we're still doing around COVID, because we're still in this pandemic, we're still facing COVID. And then in addition to the amplification of Indigenous voices and stories, but through Native voices and Native youth, because I just wholeheartedly believe in our youth, that they are the next leaders, and they're doing incredible things, from like Autumn Peltier, Tokata Iron Eyes, like all of these youth who were born in the movement, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they were like, they come like in Standing Rock and movements like that, and really coming into their own. So there's so much power and creativity in our youth that I want to help them develop that as leaders. So right now, like next month, we're going to have our COVID town hall, our national COVID town hall, called Tribal Voices from the Pandemic. We had been doing panel series about it, but it's going to be a 1 hour live stream town hall that's going to have speakers from, allies to health experts to community organizers who've been really working on COVID response for the past year and a half. So that's exciting. And then in August, we're going to have a Native Youth Summit, which will be a virtual event.
That's great.
Yeah. And focusing on and bringing in hopefully some exciting partners and speakers like our friend Mark Ruffalo.
Oh gosh. I want to be a youth. Can I de-age myself for a little bit? And that's awesome.
And then later in the year, we're going to have our BIPOC Youth Summit, which is going to be in November. And hopefully by then we'll be able to have an in-person summit.
Mm-hmm.
And that one is really going to bring together our youth leaders from across all communities of color to learn about what it means to be an ally, the importance of allyship, collaboration, intersectionality, and also, but with a focus on Indigenous issues. So it's really bringing together all of these youth leaders from across the country, learning about Indigenous issues and their peers, and what it means to be an ally to their peers. And because I think as adults right now, we're still learning what it means to be an ally.
Oh, of course.
And so to introduce that, you know,
set them
that
right.
valley.
Yep. Set
Yeah.
it right when they're young. That's absolutely right. That's
when they're young. Yeah.
Well, so on top of that, she has the Well Read Native book club, so check that out on LinkedIn, check that out on Instagram. Highly recommend that. If nothing else, if you don't attend their actual book club sessions, that's an excellent reading list that is curated for people who are curious about what Indigenous creatives and authors are doing. And I think if nothing else, follow that along on Instagram. She's at Allie Young 13 on Instagram. She produces a lot of great content, shares a lot of great content from her peers. And just thank you so much for coming on today. And I can't wait to see what you do next. It's awesome.
Thank you.
Right. Yeah. See ya.